In the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, where myths bled into daily life, one name was whispered with both terror and hope: Pazuzu. He was no god of light. His face was monstrous. A lion's head snarled beneath sharp, glaring eyes. His wings stretched wide like a desert eagle. His claws tore into earth like a predator mid-hunt, and his tail, a scorpion's sting, promised poison from behind. He wasn't a creature of temples, he had no prayers sung in his name. Yet mothers carved his image into clay. They hung it near their babies' cribs. Royal exorcists invoked his name in desperate midnight rituals. Why? Because Pazuzu was more than a demon. He was a force. A presence that rode on the hot southwestern wind, bringing drought, plague, and death. But in a world haunted by darker spirits, he became a necessary evil. Especially when one demoness, Lamashtu, rose from the underworld to steal newborns from their cradles. Against her, Pazuzu was the only thing they had. He was summoned, not worshipped, feared, yet relied upon. Not to bless, but to protect. Not to save, but to guard the edge between chaos and survival. This is not the story of a hero. It's not even the story of a villain. It's the story of a force too ancient for labels. A creature born of sand, disease, and fear, who became the last line of defense when all other gods stayed silent. Welcome to the occult mythology of Pazuzu, the demon who kept the darkness at bay by becoming darker than the darkness itself. Before gods ruled the heavens, before temples touched the sky, there was the wind. In the Mesopotamian world, wind wasn't just weather. It was a presence. It carried voices, omens, disease, and sometimes the very breath of death itself. The southwestern wind, dry and scorching, came without mercy. It stripped the fields, it withered skin, it filled lungs with dust and left behind silence. The ancients believed this wind had a name: Pazuzu. He didn't descend from a pantheon. He wasn't the son of any god. He simply was, a force older than law, older than mercy. He rose from the burning deserts, taking shape in the minds of people who had no other way to explain the terror that crept through the night when the wind blew just wrong. To them, Pazuzu wasn't mythology, he was reality. A being that arrived with the heat and vanished with the last dying breath of the sick. His presence wasn't questioned, it was felt and feared. Unlike divine beings who brought blessings or judgment, Pazuzu was a walking contradiction. His arrival meant suffering, but ignoring him meant worse. He wasn't prayed to, he was dealt with. Carefully, strategically, like a storm you can't outrun, only brace for. In this world of dry earth, cracked lips, and burning skies, Pazuzu wasn't born. He manifested. The breath of death had a face, and it wore a crown of dust. No part of Pazuzu's body was accidental. He was a living sigil, each feature carved not for form, but for meaning. His face bore the snarl of a lion, the apex predator of the ancient imagination. His eyes were wide and unblinking, watching always. His body was human, but twisted, unnatural. A reminder that he stood outside the order of men. His feet were talons, sharpened like a hawk's. His wings, outstretched, were those of an eagle, the sky's killer. His tail ended in the venomous sting of a desert scorpion. To see him was to witness the worst of nature stitched together into a single nightmare. But this wasn't random horror, it was symbolism. Each limb and line spoke the language of fear. The lion for strength and domination, the eagle for divine wrath, the scorpion for silent, deadly revenge. Pazuzu wasn't just frightening, he was built to be understood by those who feared him. In Mesopotamian magic, visual power was everything. What was drawn, carved, or sculpted held weight in the spirit world. A demon with no form could be forgotten. A demon with this form? Never. So they etched him in stone, molded him in clay. They gave shape to the unspeakable. Because when the wind howled and shadows moved along the mud brick walls, people needed to believe that terror could be seen, named, and maybe, just maybe, controlled. Pazuzu was not just a being. He was a warning, a mirror of everything that lived outside the bounds of human safety. Pazuzu had no temple, no priest wore his colors, no hymns rose in his name, no golden statue stood in his honor, glowing in torchlight. Because Pazuzu didn't belong to the world of worship. He belonged to the world of fear. In ancient Mesopotamia, gods were part of society. They governed crops, kings, rivers, and rain. They could be pleased or angered, and rituals were crafted to balance their will. But Pazuzu, he was different. He didn't answer to kings or priests. He couldn't be bribed with offerings or bound by loyalty. He wasn't divine, and he wasn't damned. He was outside. He came when he wanted, or worse, when the wind called him. And yet, in this absence of religion, there was ritual. There were scrolls, whispered incantations, and tokens forged in secrecy, not to worship Pazuzu, but to contain him, to speak his name not in reverence, but in desperation. He was not a god, he was a threshold. Where gods failed, Pazuzu was invoked. When night fell and darker spirits crept from the edge of dreams, people turned not to the heavens, but to him, the demon with no master, the force that answered fear, not faith. Because Pazuzu was not of this world, he didn't fit in its rules, he didn't obey its laws. He was a reminder that beyond the firelight, beyond the ordered cosmos, there was still something wild, waiting, watching. And sometimes that something wore a lion's face and carried the desert on its back. In the ancient world, few names stirred terror like Lamashtu. She wasn't just feared, she was hated. A demoness who crept into homes at night, slithering through shadows to reach pregnant women and newborns. She drank the blood of mothers, she strangled infants in their sleep, her breath brought disease, her laughter signaled death. And no god, no priest, no wall of stone could keep her out. Except for one. Pazuzu. He didn't come as a savior. He didn't come with mercy. But he came when no one else would. Though he was a demon, Pazuzu hated Lamashtu. The texts don't explain why. Perhaps it was ancient rivalry, perhaps something older, deeper, darker. But what mattered to the people of Mesopotamia was this: only Pazuzu could stop her. So they placed his image over cradles. They buried his figurines beneath thresholds. They whispered his name in midnight rites, not out of love, but out of necessity. It took a monster to fight a monster. Rituals became warfare. Demonic symbols were arranged not to summon chaos, but to bind it, to weaponize it against something worse. Pazuzu was not a friend. He was a shield made of claws and venom, raised when hope ran out. And when Lamashtu came, it was said she would see his face and flee. Not because she feared harm, but because he knew her by scent, by step, by sin. He was her equal, and in the dark, when gods looked away, that was enough. They didn't build temples for Pazuzu. They built barriers. In the homes of ancient Mesopotamia, protection didn't come from sermons or scripture. It came from clay, small, crude figurines baked in fire and carved with care. These were not decorations, they were weapons. Each amulet bore the unmistakable face. The twisted features of Pazuzu, his mouth snarling, eyes bulging, wings outstretched, tail curled like a threat. Some were worn around the neck, others were hidden inside walls or placed beneath beds, always facing outward, always watching, because they believed that if you could see Pazuzu, so could the things that lurked in the dark, and those things would turn back. But a carving alone wasn't enough. There were spells chanted in the ancient Akkadian tongue, words chosen for rhythm, precision, and vibration. These incantations were not prayers. They were contracts, demands, formulas that called Pazuzu to guard a space, not out of loyalty, but through binding. The rituals had to be exact, the moon had to be right, the direction of the wind mattered. The amulet had to be activated, an act of aligning the image with the incantation, the clay with the breath. It was dangerous work, because calling Pazuzu wasn't safe. It was never safe, but neither was letting Lamashtu in. Neither was trusting silence when the wind howled outside the door. So they risked it. Every night, for their children, for their sanity, they summoned the demon, not to destroy, but to defend. And in doing so, they crossed a line. They turned evil into a tool and terror into protection. Pazuzu didn't bring order. He didn't bring chaos either. He existed somewhere in between, a boundary with claws. In the mythology of Mesopotamia, the gods represented structure. They brought rain at the right time, protected the harvest, and watched over kings. Demons, on the other hand, came from the margins, born of night, wilderness, storm, and sickness. They were the wild edges of the map, the parts no law could reach. But Pazuzu, he wasn't a servant of the gods. He wasn't a free agent of evil. He was something else, a force that neither obeyed nor opposed, but simply intervened. He moved like the desert wind, sudden, violent, without pattern. And like the wind, he could destroy or defend. He wasn't summoned out of trust. He was summoned out of necessity. He didn't bring harmony. But sometimes he brought pause. He delayed death. He held darkness back just long enough for the sun to rise. To call Pazuzu was to admit that nothing else worked, that prayers failed, that gods were silent, that balance, if it came, had to come from a place no priest dared enter. In this way, Pazuzu became the knife's edge between despair and survival. He didn't demand worship. He didn't reward belief. He simply responded to fear, raw and honest. And in a world full of forces too dark to name, sometimes the only way to survive was to call the darkness by name and point it at something worse. Time buried the cities, the temples crumbled, the languages died, the winds still blow across the old empires of Mesopotamia, but few remember the names whispered into them, except one, Pazuzu. His story never ended. Not because he was loved. It's not because he was holy, but because he was feared and he was useful. You won't find grand epics about him. No golden idols, no priests chanting his virtues. And yet in the ruins, archaeologists have uncovered him again and again. His grotesque figure carved into clay, his name etched in cuneiform, sealed inside burial walls and behind doors meant never to be opened. Because even in silence, Pazuzu lingers. He is the echo of a time when humans fought nightmares with other nightmares, when hope wore claws, when demons were used as shields. He reminds us that mythology isn't just about gods and glory, it's about survival. It's about what people reach for when the light fades and all they have left is fear. Pazuzu was never worshipped, but he was never forgotten. He stands as a symbol of ancient Kuroktan terror, a protector forged from shadows. A guardian summoned not in light, but in darkness, by those who dared to believe that sometimes only the monstrous can keep the monsters away. So when the wind howls through your walls and something primal stirs in your blood, remember, it might just be the breath of an old force, still watching, still waiting, still named Pazuzu.